The confession came out wrong. That was the thing Elara would remember later, when everything had already shattered and reformed into something she never could have predicted. She meant to whisper it to Ronan, the sandy-haired beta, who had been sneaking her extra bread rolls from the kitchen for 3 years, the one whose scent of dried hay and soap she had convinced herself was the bond. She meant to lean close during the bonding ceremony, when the music from the string quartet swelled loud enough to cover her words, and finally say what she had been rehearsing in the mirror of the servants' washroom for 6 days straight. Instead, she turned to the wrong wolf. The great hall of Ironmere Pack smelled the way it always did during ceremonies. Beeswax candles melting in iron sconces, pine boughs draped across the rafters, their needles browning at the tips because someone always hung them 2 days too early. Roasted venison from the spit in the courtyard, the fat popping and hissing even from 50 yards away. And underneath it, all the metallic bite of dominance from the 100 wolves packed shoulder to shoulder in their formal attire, every one of them more important than Elara would ever be. She stood near the east wall between a stone column and a tapestry so old the hunting scene woven into it had faded to ghosts. This was the spot the servants used, close enough to refill wine goblets, far enough to be invisible. Elara had perfected invisibility over the past 4 years since her mother died, and left her with nothing but a surname that made the Pack Council wince, and a position in the Ironmere Records Hall filing land disputes and water rights claims in a basement office that smelled like mouse droppings and cold ink. Records clerk. That was what the formal title said. What it meant in practice was that Elara spent her days copying territorial agreements in her careful hand, fixing the errors the senior clerks left, because they knew she would catch them, and eating her lunch alone at a desk pushed against a wall where the heating vent didn't reach. She hadn't eaten today. The ceremony preparation had started before dawn, and the kitchen staff had been redirected entirely to the feast. Elara's stomach was a fist clenching and unclenching beneath her ribs. She pressed her hand flat against it, willing it to be quiet, because the last thing she needed was for her body to betray her in a room full of wolves with supernatural hearing. Her dress was her mother's, dove-grey, hemmed twice because her mother had been taller. It fit wrong at the shoulders, too loose where Elara's collarbone jutted sharp beneath the fabric. She had lost weight again. The dress smelled like the cedar chest she kept it in, and beneath that something fainter. Lavender, her mother's soap. The bonding ceremony was not for her. It was never for someone like her. The ceremony was the annual ritual, where unmated wolves of status formally declared their intent to seek the bond, stepping into the center of the hall under the antler chandelier and announcing themselves to the pack. Elara was not of status. She was not even supposed to attend. But the Alpha of Ironmere, a heavy-jowled man named Aldrich, whose breath always smelled like the anise liqueur he drank from a flask he thought no one noticed, had required all pack members present for this particular ceremony. Because this year, the Alpha King was visiting. Elara had never seen the Alpha King. She had only heard the stories, the same ones every wolf in every pack had heard since childhood. Kyle Voss, youngest Alpha King in 3 centuries, earned the title not through bloodline, but through combat, killing the previous king's champion in a challenge that lasted 11 minutes and left the stone floor of the fighting pit cracked in 3 places. Ruled the 5 territories with an iron discipline that bordered on cruelty, or so the rumors went. Had never taken a Luna. Had never shown interest in taking one. His wolf was said to be black as a moonless night, so large that lesser wolves physically could not stop themselves from dropping to their knees in his presence. Elara did not care about the Alpha King. She cared about Ronan. Ronan was standing 12 feet away from her, near the wine table, wearing the navy jacket he only brought out for formal occasions. It had a small tear at the left cuff that he had tried to mend himself, and the stitches were uneven. Elara had noticed this 3 weeks ago, and had thought about offering to fix it for him. She had not offered. She never offered things to people because offering meant risking the specific expression she had seen on too many faces in this pack. The slight pulling back of the chin. The half-second pause before a polite refusal. The look that said, "I forgot you were here." But tonight she was going to tell him. The bond had been there for 2 months, or at least she was fairly certain it was the bond. Her wolf with a faint presence that most wolves felt as a roaring fire, but that Elara had only ever experienced as a low warmth behind her sternum, like coals banked for the night, had stirred when Ronan handed her a bread roll in the corridor outside the records office. His fingers had brushed hers. The warmth had flared. Her heart had done something complicated. She had stood there holding the bread roll for a full 30 seconds after he walked away, feeling the ghost of his touch on her fingertips and thinking, oh no, she was not supposed to have a mate. Omegas with wolves as weak as hers did not get mates. That was what Aldrich's wife Vera had told her at her mother's funeral, standing over the closed casket with a glass of white wine in her manicured hand. Some wolves are born to serve the bond, in others not to have it themselves. Be grateful you have a place here at all, Elara. Elara had been grateful. She had been grateful so hard and so long that gratitude had calcified into something that sat in her chest like a stone, smooth and cold and permanent. But the warmth when Ronan touched her, that had been real. The string quartet began the processional. Wolves of status stepped forward one by one, declaring themselves. A tall female with auburn hair and the confidence of someone who had never filed a land dispute in a basement. A pair of twin brothers from the warrior class, their arms thick as Elara's thighs. A young widow who had lost her first mate to the border wars and stood with her chin lifted and her eyes dry, and Elara respected her for that, for the steel in her spine. The crowd shifted. Elara saw her opening. Ronan was only 8 feet away now, his back to her watching the proceedings. She could slip between the column and the broad back of a warrior whose name she did not know. She could reach Ronan. She could lean close. She could say it. She moved. The crowd shifted again. Someone stepped sideways. The warrior she had been planning to slide past turned at exactly the wrong moment, his elbow catching her shoulder and spinning her 45 degrees off course. Elara stumbled. Her hand shot out and caught the arm of the person next to her, the person she thought was Ronan, because the navy jacket was right there, dark fabric under her fingers. Except the arm under her hand wasn't Ronan's. It was harder, denser. The muscle beneath the fabric felt like braided steel cable, and the jacket was not navy. It was black, pure, absolute black, the kind of black that expensive fabric achieves when it is dyed 3 times and pressed with steam until it holds no light at all. Elara did not look up. She was already speaking. The words she had rehearsed 6 days in a row came tumbling out in a breathless whisper because she had committed and her body was on autopilot, and the fear of stopping was greater than the fear of continuing. I know this is insane, and you probably do not feel it back, but I have to tell you. The bond. I feel it. Every time you are near me, my wolf wakes up and I cannot breathe right, and I know I am nobody. I know I am just the records clerk, and you are You are everything I am not. But the bond does not care about status, and I cannot keep pretending I do not feel it." She stopped. The arm under her hand had not moved. The great hall had gone very, very quiet. Not the quiet of a pause between songs. The quiet of 200 wolves holding their breath at the same time. The quiet that happens in the forest half a second before a predator strikes. Elara looked up. The face she saw was not Ronan's. The jaw was cut sharper, shadowed with stubble so dark it was almost blue-black. The cheekbones sat high and brutal. A scar ran through the left eyebrow, thin and white, the kind made by a blade, not claws. The nose had been broken at least once. The lips were pressed together in an expression that was not anger, not amusement, not anything she could read. And the eyes. The eyes were amber. Not the soft amber of honey or autumn leaves. Amber like molten metal. Amber like the last light before a fire consumes the wood. Kael Voss, the Alpha King. She had just confessed her mate bond to the Alpha King of the 5 territories. Her hand was still on his arm. She ripped it away, as if his sleeve were made of lit coals. The blood drained from her face so fast, she felt it go, felt the cold rushing in from her extremities, to pool in the hollow of her chest. Her vision swam. She thought she might faint, and the humiliation of that of collapsing in front of every wolf of importance in Ironmere was the only thing that kept her knees locked. As she started, the Alpha King didn't blink. That was wrong. That was not right. She had made a mistake, a catastrophic, life-ruining mistake, and the Alpha King was supposed to be looking at her with the pulling back of the chin, the half-second pause, the look. Instead, he was looking at her the way she imagined a wolf looked at something it had been tracking for miles through snow, that final moment when the wind shifted and the scent hit full force. His nostrils flared, barely, a millimeter of movement. But she saw it, and then she smelled it, not Ronan's dried hay and soap, something else entirely. Black pine resin, the kind that bleeds from the heartwood of old-growth trees. Wood smoke, but not campfire. Smoke, the deeper, sharper smoke of a forge, where metal is being shaped by force. And underneath those, something she had no name, for something that was not a scent at all, but a frequency, a vibration in her chest cavity that resonated with the low warmth behind her sternum and turned it into a blaze. Her wolf, the weak little wolf that had never been more than coals, erupted. Elara gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. The heat spread through her like a cracked dam, rushing through her veins, flooding her fingers, her throat, the backs of her eyes. She could feel it. The bond. The real bond. Not the gentle stirring she had felt with Ronan. This was the thunderclap, the recognition, the thing every wolf story, and every pack elder, and every sappy romance novel in the Ironmere library described, and none of them had gotten it right, because none of them had mentioned that it hurt. It hurt like a muscle cramping after years of disuse. It hurt like blood returning to a limb that had been numb so long you forgot it was part of your body. She staggered back. Her shoulder blade hit the stone column behind her, and the cold of the stone through her mother's thin dress was the only thing that felt real. The Alpha King's hand moved. He caught her wrist. Not hard, not rough, but absolute. The way you catch something precious that is falling. His fingers closed around the narrow bones of her wrist, and his thumb settled against her pulse point, and he held her there. Say it again. His voice was lower than she expected. Quiet, not the booming command of an alpha addressing a crowd. The voice of a man speaking to one person and one person only, and the 200 wolves in that hall might as well have been furniture. Elara could not breathe. Her pulse was hammering against his thumb, and he could feel it. She knew he could feel it. And the knowledge that he was feeling her heartbeat while she was feeling his scent in her lungs was so intimate it made her dizzy. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I thought you were someone else." Something shifted in those amber eyes. Not hurt, not anger. Something older. Something she would later recognize as the expression of a man who had been waiting for something so long he had stopped expecting it, and the arrival of it, even wrapped in a stumbled confession to the wrong wolf, had cracked something open in him that he could not close again. "Your wolf," he said. His thumb pressed slightly harder against her pulse. "I can feel it. Can you feel mine?" It was not a question. And she could. Beneath the scent of pine resin and forge smoke, beneath the pressure of his fingers on her wrist, she could feel something massive and dark and patient pushing against the edges of her awareness. His wolf, not pushing to dominate, pushing to reach her, the way a dog presses its nose against a window when it sees its owner coming home. The comparison almost made her laugh, and the almost laugh almost made her cry, and the combination of those two things happening simultaneously in her chest was what broke through 4 years of calcified gratitude and quiet compliance. "Yes," she said. "I can feel it." The great hall exploded, not literally, but the murmur that swept through the crowd had the force of detonation. 200 wolves whispering at once, the sound layering and building until it was a wall of noise. Elara caught fragments. Omega. Records clerk. The Alpha King. Impossible. Mate Bond. That little nothing from the basement office. Aldrich was pushing through the crowd. She could hear his heavy footsteps before she saw him, the thud, thud, thud of a man who was accustomed to making the floor shake when he walked. He broke through the ring of bodies that had formed around Elara, and the Alpha King, his face, the color of raw meat, the anise on his breath, preceding him by 3 feet. "Your Majesty," he said, and the obsequiousness in his voice was so thick it was practically visible. "I must apologize for this disturbance. This girl, she is. No one, she is a clerk in the records office. She has no standing. Her wolf is barely functional. She is confused. She does not know what she is saying. The bond does not manifest in wolves as weak as hers. Everyone knows this." The Alpha King had not released Elara's wrist. He turned his head to look at Aldrich, and the motion was slow, deliberate, the way a predator turns towards something that has made a noise in the underbrush, but does not yet warrant the full effort of pursuit. "Everyone knows this," the Alpha King repeated. His voice had not changed, still quiet, still pitched for one person, but the temperature in the hall dropped. Elara felt it. Every wolf felt it. The dominance that rolled off Kyle Voss was not a metaphor. It was a physical weight pressing down on the shoulders and the back of the neck, and Aldrich, who outweighed the Alpha King by 50 pounds, took an involuntary step backward. Then Aldrich did something that Elara would think about for a long time afterward. He glanced at her. Just a glance. Half a second. And in that half second, she saw something in his eyes that was not contempt or anger or embarrassment. It was fear, but not fear of the Alpha King. Fear of her. Fear of what it meant if the Omega clerk in the basement could bond with the most powerful wolf alive. Fear that everything he had built his authority on, every hierarchy, every ranking, every careful system of who mattered and who did not, was wrong. He looked away. The moment passed. "With respect, Your Majesty, the girl should be removed. She is causing a scene. The ceremony must continue." The Alpha King released Elara's wrist. She felt the absence of his touch like a door slamming shut. cold rushed into the space where his warmth had been. But he had not stepped away. He had turned fully toward Aldrich now, and Alara could see the breadth of his back, the black jacket stretched across shoulders that seemed designed by someone who did not believe in moderation. He was between her and Aldrich. A wall. You are telling me the Alpha King said to remove my mate from my presence. The word landed like a fist. Mate. Not suspected bond. Not possible connection. Mate. Claimed, declared, absolute. The murmuring stopped. Every wolf in the hall heard the word and understood its weight and its permanence. Aldrich's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish pulled from water, all the authority and bluster deflating in real time. Alara watched it happen and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a hollow ringing in her ears and the afterimage of the Alpha King's thumb on her pulse point. I did not know, Aldrich said finally, and his voice had shrunk to something she had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. The Alpha King studied him for a moment that stretched like taffy. Then he turned back to Alara. She was still pressed against the column. Her mother's dress hung loose on her thin frame. Her hair dark brown and unruly, because she could never afford the keratin treatments the other females used, had come partially free from the braid she had done that morning. She was aware, painfully aware, of how she looked, the collarbone jutting above the neckline, the shadows under her eyes from the fluorescent lights in the basement office, the bitten-down nails, the flat shoes she wore because she stood on stone floors 8 hours a day, and heels were a cruelty she could not justify. She waited for the pulling back of the chin. It did not come. "What is your name?" he said. "Alara. Alara Vane." He said her name back to her. Just once. Alara. And the way his mouth shaped the syllables made it sound like a word she had never heard before. Not the name the senior clerks used when they dropped a stack of misfiled contracts on her desk. Not the name Aldrich's wife used when she wanted someone to refill the wine. Something else. Something that belonged to her. Alara Vane, the Alpha King said, "Come with me." She should have refused. She knew this even as her feet moved. Every rational thought she had was screaming that this was wrong, that Alpha Kings did not claim Omega Records clerks, that the bond she was feeling was some kind of malfunction, a short circuit in her defective wolf, that she would go with him, and he would realize the mistake within the hour, and she would be sent back to the basement with a story that would follow her for the rest of her life. But her wolf was not asking for permission. For the first time in 23 years, her wolf wasn't banked coals. It was a furnace. It was a wildfire. It was pulling her toward Kael Voss with a force that made her teeth ache, and resisting it would have been like resisting gravity. She stepped away from the column. She took his arm. His muscle tensed under her fingers, then relaxed deliberately, as if he was consciously choosing not to be made of stone for her. They walked through the great hall together, the Alpha King and the records clerk, and 200 wolves parted before them, like water before the prow of a ship, and Alara kept her eyes forward and her spine straight, and her hand on the arm of a man she had known for 90 seconds, and already could not imagine not touching. Behind them, Ronan stood by the wine table, holding a bread roll he had been saving for her watching her leave, with an expression she would never see, because she did not look back. The Alpha King's quarters in Ironmere were on the 3rd floor of the East Wing, a suite of rooms that Aldrich had prepared with the desperate thoroughness of a man trying to impress a god. Alara noticed the details because noticing details was what she did. Fresh-cut pine in crystal vases, the water already clouding because someone had forgotten to strip the lower needles. A fire burning in the hearth, the logs stacked in the crosshatch pattern that looked decorative, but actually burned less efficiently. A tray of food on the side table, cheeses and cured meats, and a small pot of honey, the good kind, the dark amber wildflower honey from the Eastern Territories that cost more per jar than Elara earned in a day. She was so hungry she could smell the honey from the doorway. The Alpha King closed the door behind them. The sound of the ceremony below became muffled, distant. Elara stood in the center of the room and did not know what to do with her hands. He did not cross to her immediately. That surprised her. Everything she had heard about Alpha Kings, about the possessiveness, the inability to tolerate distance from a newly discovered mate, suggested he should be closing the gap, caging her against walls, pressing his nose into her neck to breathe her scent. Instead, he walked to the side table, picked up the tray of food, and brought it to the low table in front of the fire. "Sit," he said. "Eat." She stared at him. "You have not eaten today. I can hear your stomach." He said it without embarrassment, without the delicacy most people used when pointing out someone's body. A simple observation. Fact. Elara sat. She reached for the cheese. Then she stopped because her hands were shaking, and she did not want him to see her hands shake. He sat across from her. Not beside her. Across. A deliberate distance. He leaned forward and cut a piece of cheese with a small knife, placed it on a piece of dark bread, and pushed the plate toward her. She ate. The cheese was sharp and crumbly aged cheddar with crystals that crunched between her teeth. The bread was dense, seeded, still faintly warm from the oven. She ate 3 pieces before she realized she had not spoken. "Thank you," she said. He watched her eat with an expression she could not read. Not hunger, not pity. Attention. The complete undivided attention of someone who had spent years in rooms full of people trying to get his attention, and was now choosing to give all of it to a woman eating cheese. "You said you thought I was someone else," he said. "Who?" Elara swallowed. "A beta named Ronan. He works in the kitchens. He has been kind to me." "Kind," the Alpha King repeated. "He brings me bread sometimes, when I forget to eat, or when the kitchens are already closed by the time I finish in the records office." Something moved behind Kyle's eyes. Not jealousy, which she had expected. Something colder. Calculation. "Your pack does not feed you. I feed myself. The schedule is difficult sometimes. The records office closes late, and the kitchens—" He held up a hand. She stopped. "Your Alpha. Eldrick. He has an Omega member of his pack who works through meals regularly enough that another wolf has taken to smuggling her bread. And he does nothing." It was not a question. She answered it anyway. "He does not know. I do not think he notices me very much." The Alpha King leaned back in his chair. The firelight carved shadows under his cheekbones, turned the scar through his eyebrow into a white thread against bronze skin. He looked, Elara thought, like a man doing math, adding up offenses, calculating a sum. "I notice you," he said. The words were simple. They should not have hit as hard as they did, but Elara had spent 4 years making herself small, making herself quiet, tucking herself into corners and pressing against columns, and eating alone at desks near broken heating vents. 4 years of being the name no one called unless they needed something filed. 4 years of learning that the safest way to exist in Ironmere was to exist as little as possible. And now the most powerful wolf alive was looking at her with those molten amber eyes and saying, "I notice you." And her wolf was howling in her chest, actually. Howling a sound she felt in her ribs like the reverberation of a struck bell. And she was terrified. She stood up. "I need to go." The Alpha King didn't move. "Sit down, Elara. You do not understand. This is not. I am not what you think. My wolf is barely there. The pack healers tested me when I was 13, and they said my wolf was the weakest they had ever documented. I cannot shift fully. I have never shifted fully. I get part way, and then it stops. And I am stuck. I am this half thing, neither wolf nor human. And whatever you felt downstairs, it is not going to be what you want. She was breathing hard. The words had come out in a rush, each one a stone she had been carrying for a decade, and setting them down did not make her lighter. It made her feel stripped, exposed. Like the moment when you finally clean out the wound and realize it is deeper than you thought. The Alpha King stood. He moved slowly the way you move around a frightened animal, and she hated that she noticed the care in it and was grateful for it simultaneously. He stopped 2 feet from her, close enough that his scent wrapped around her like a second atmosphere. Pine resin, forge smoke, that nameless frequency that made her wolf press against the inside of her skin. The healers who tested you, he said. What method did they use? She blinked. The standard aura reading. They press their palms against your chest and measure the wolf's resonance. He nodded slowly. And your pack healers, they were trained here, in Ironmare. Yes, the standard aura reading measures dominant wolf energy, he said. It was designed to identify wolves who would make strong warriors, strong alphas, strong betas. It does not measure what you have. Elara stared at him. What do I have? He raised his hand, slowly, gave her time to pull away. She did not. His palm settled against her sternum, over her heart, over the place where her wolf lived, like a furnace she had only just discovered. His eyes closed. The world went very quiet. Elara felt his wolf reach for hers, not the aggressive probe of an alpha asserting dominance. Something gentler, an inquiry, a question posed not in words but in warmth, in pressure, in the slow, steady beat of his heart, transmitted through his palm into her chest. Her wolf responded. What happened next would take her weeks to fully understand. In the moment, she experienced it as heat, enormous, rolling, oceanic heat, starting where his hand met her body and radiating outward until she could feel it in her toes, in her scalp, in the spaces between her vertebrae. Her wolf, the weak wolf, the defective wolf, the coals banked for the night wolf, uncoiled. It was not small. It had never been small. It had been compressed, folded in on itself like a fist clenched so tight the knuckles turn white, and now under the Alpha King's touch it was opening, and what was inside was not the feeble flicker the Ironmare healers had measured. It was something vast and silver and burning. Kyle opened his eyes. There it is, he said. His voice was rough, changed, not the controlled quiet of the man in the great hall. Something raw, as if her wolf's unfolding had unfolded something in him too. What is that? Elara whispered. What is happening? Your wolf is not weak. It is a submissive wolf, a true submissive. The rarest classification in our kind. His hand was trembling against her chest. She could feel the fine vibration of it. 1 in 10,000 wolves is born with submissive energy. The Ironmare healers would not have known. The standard test reads submissive energy as absence. They looked at you and saw nothing because they did not know what they were looking at. She shook her head. That is not possible. Submissive wolves are... Legend, he finished. Myth. The kind of story old wolves tell around fires when the moon is full. Except they are not. I have met 2 in my life. One was my mother. The other is standing in front of me. Ilara's vision blurred. Not tears. Not yet. Her body was overwhelmed, processing too many signals at once. The heat of her wolf, the pressure of his hand, the scent of him, the low gravel of his voice, saying things that rewrote the last decade of her life. What does it mean? She managed. It means your wolf does not fight. It heals, it calms, it anchors. A pack with a true submissive is stronger than a pack with 10 alpha warriors, because a submissive holds the bonds together. Every wolf near you is more stable, more grounded, more themselves. You are not the weakness the Ironmere pack thought you were. You are the reason their pack holds together at all, and they do not even know it. He removed his hand. The absence of his touch was a physical ache. Ilara pressed her own hand against her chest, feeling the aftershock of her wolf's awakening, the way you feel the ringing in your ears after a bell stops tolling. The Alpha King stepped back. He turned to the fire. She watched his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way the scar caught the light. "You said you are not what I want," he said. "You are wrong. But I will not claim you tonight. Not until you understand what you are. Not until you choose it." Ilara opened her mouth, closed it. "There is a bed in the next room," he said. "Sleep. We will talk in the morning." His mouth curved, the barest ghost of a smile. "I will not leave. My wolf would tear through the wall if I tried." She should have argued. She should have insisted on returning to the servants' quarters, to her narrow cot with its thin blanket and the draught from the window that never properly latched. Instead, she walked into the next room, lay down on a bed that smelled like lavender and clean linen, and something else, something she was beginning to recognize as him, as the pine and forge and frequency that was Kael Voss. She pulled the quilt to her chin. She pressed her hand against her sternum, where her wolf burned like a star that had been waiting 23 years to ignite. She slept better than she had in 4 years. She woke to voices. Not in the room, in the corridor outside. The Alpha King's voice, low and controlled, and another voice, female, sharp and brittle as snapped ice. Ilara sat up. Grey morning light filtered through the curtains. She was still in her mother's dress, wrinkled now from sleep, the dove-grey fabric creased in lines that mapped the shape of her body against the unfamiliar mattress. She rose and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Cannot be serious." Vera's voice. Aldrich's wife. The Ironmere Luna. She spoke with the precise diction of a woman who had practiced removing her rural accent over many years, and sometimes under stress let a consonant slip. She is a nobody. Her mother was a border patrol medic who died of an infection she was too proud to treat. Her father was never even identified. She has no bloodline, no status, no... The Alpha King's voice cut in, clean as a blade through cloth. "You have 3 seconds to stop speaking about my mate." Silence. Then Vera lower, now controlled. "Your Majesty, I am not trying to offend. I am trying to protect you. The Ironmere pack has been loyal to the crown for 6 generations. We have provided warriors, resources, intelligence. And I am telling you respectfully that this girl is not what she appears. There have been anomalies." Ilara's blood went cold. She pressed closer to the door. Anomalies, the Alpha King repeated. Things that happen when she is present. Small things. Injuries that heal faster than they should. Disputes that resolve without intervention. Wolves who were on the edge of breaking bond, suddenly stabilizing. We noticed. We have been watching. You have been watching her for 3 years. Aldrich wanted to report it to the crown, but I advised against it. I thought we could manage it, use it. If a submissive's power is unconscious, it can be directed, channeled. The pack has benefited from her presence without her knowing, without her consent. If we reported her, the Crown would take her, and we would lose the advantage. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elara had ever heard. So she was not ignored, the Alpha King said, and his voice had changed, again dropped into a register that was not anger, not the cold, controlled anger of a king, but something more dangerous. He sounded like a man who had just realized the full dimensions of a cruelty he had walked into the middle of. You knew what she was. You knew she was rare, and you kept her in a basement filing land disputes, underfed, alone, using her power without her knowledge, not because you did not see her, because you saw her too clearly and decided she was more useful, invisible. Your Majesty, get out! Steps. Fast, the click of heels on stone retreating, then silence again. Elara stood with her forehead against the door and her eyes closed and her hands shaking for the second time in 12 hours. 3 years. They had known for 3 years. Vera had known. Aldrich had known. And they had kept her small, kept her hungry, kept her in the dark, because a submissive wolf who did not know her own power was a submissive wolf who could be used. She thought about Aldrich at the ceremony, the half-second of fear in his eyes when the Alpha King claimed her. Not fear of Kael Voss, fear that the system was wrong. No, fear that the system was exposed, that the tool they had kept locked in the basement was being taken away. She opened the door. The Alpha King was standing in the corridor, his back against the opposite wall, his arms folded, his head bowed. He looked up when she appeared. The amber eyes were darker now. Stormlit, you heard, he said. Yes. He pushed off the wall. I am going to ask you a question. I need you to answer honestly. All right. Do you want to stay in Ironmere? She thought about it, really thought about it. Not the automatic yes of a wolf who had been taught that belonging to a pack was survival, and survival was everything. She thought about the basement office, and the cold ink, and the heating vent that did not reach her desk. She thought about Vera's precise diction carving her life into useful and useless. She thought about Aldrich's flask of Annie's liqueur, and the way he looked through her like she was made of glass. She thought about Ronan and his bread rolls, and his uneven stitches, and the gentle stirring she had mistaken for a mate bond, because she had never felt anything stronger. No, she said. I do not want to stay. The Alpha King held out his hand. Then come home. It took 3 days to reach Kyle's territory. They traveled by convoy, 4 black vehicles, with tinted windows moving through landscapes that changed from the flat farmland around Ironmere to dense pine forests to the mountain passes that marked the entrance to the capital territory. Elara sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle, with Kyle beside her, not touching a careful 8 inches between his thigh and hers on the leather seat. He gave her space. This continued to surprise her. On the first day, he asked her about the records office. She told him about the land disputes, the water rights, the territorial agreements she had copied in her careful hand, the errors the senior clerks left because they knew she would catch them. He listened with the same total attention he had given her while she ate cheese in his quarters, and when she finished he said, You have read every territorial agreement between every pack in the Ironmere jurisdiction. I suppose I have, she said. I never thought about it that way. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. You have a better understanding of inter-pack legal frameworks than anyone on my advisory council. I am going to find that either very useful or very humbling. On the second day, they stopped at a roadside station to refuel. Elara went inside to use the restroom and found herself staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. She looked different. She could not identify what had changed. Her face was the same. Her hair was the same. But something behind her eyes had shifted, like a lens clicking into focus. She realized it was her wolf. Still there. Still burning. Not the wild furnace of the first awakening, but a steady, warm glow, the kind of heat that meant the fire had found its fuel and would not go out. When she came back to the vehicle, Kyle was standing outside it, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a voice too low for human hearing. He saw her and ended the call. "Problem," she said. "Not for you." He opened her door. A challenge from a pack leader in the Northern Territory. Disputed border. He wants a formal audience. What will you do? Listen to him. Then show him the territorial agreement that proves he is wrong. I assume you have read it. She blinked. The Greymore Ashfall Boundary Accord. Third revision. The River Clause. His mouth did the ghost of a smile thing. I rest my case. On the third day, an hour from the capital, Kyle's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and his face changed. Elara had been watching the pine trees blur past the window. She turned to him and knew immediately that something was wrong. The temperature in the vehicle had dropped. Not literally, but his wolf, which she had been feeling as a constant warm pressure against her awareness, like a large animal resting against a door, had gone rigid. Alert. "What happened?" she said. Aldrich Kale said. His voice was the blade-through-cloth voice. He has declared Ironmere independent of the crown. Claimed I kidnapped a member of his pack. He said kidnapped. He said abducted. He is rallying the southeastern packs, claiming I took you by force, and that the bond is fabricated. The air left Elara's lungs in a rush. The bond is not fabricated. I know that. He looked at her. You know that. But the southeastern packs do not know you. They know Aldrich has been a reliable ally for 6 generations, and they know that an Alpha King claiming an Omega records clerk as his mate is from the outside suspicious. Elara pressed her palms flat against her thighs. The fabric of the dress she was wearing, one of the new ones Kyle had procured from somewhere between Ironmere and here, navy blue and warm, and fitting her properly for the first time in years, wrinkled under her grip. "What does he actually want?" she said. "He does not want me back. He does not care about me. He cares about what I can do. Yes, he wants the submissive power, the anchoring. He has been using it for 3 years, and he is afraid of what happens to his pack without it." Kyle nodded. Slowly. "Without you, the latent instabilities in his pack structure will surface within weeks. Bonds he has been holding together with your unconscious power will fracture. Wolves who stayed loyal because your presence dampened their aggression will start challenging his authority. So he will fight to get me back. He will try." They arrived at the capital as the sun was setting. Elara's first impression of Kale's home was not the massive stone fortress she had expected. It was a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings, old and new, woven together stone walls, giving way to glass atriums, ancient guard towers connected by covered walkways to modern wings with heated floors and windows that actually latched. It was a place that had been lived in and added to and repaired and loved for generations, and it showed in the mismatched stones and the doorways that were slightly different heights, and the garden in the central courtyard where someone had planted rosemary and thyme between the cobblestones. It smelled like home, which was impossible because she had never been here before. But her wolf recognized it. Her wolf settled into the scent of this place, like a body sinking into warm water, and the tension Ilara had been carrying in her shoulders since the phone call about Aldrich released slightly fractionally enough that she could breathe. The weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. Kyle installed her in quarters adjacent to his own. Separate rooms, separate beds. A door between them that he left closed. She could feel him through the wall at night, his wolf pressing against the barrier between them like a tide against a seawall, and she pressed back, and they slept like that, separated by stone and plaster, and the decision he had made not to claim her until she chose it. He gave her access to the Royal Archives. This was, she suspected, partly strategic and partly a gift, and she didn't mind the duality. The archives were everything the Ironmere Records Office was not. Warm, well-lit, organized by a system she recognized as a variant of the old territorial taxonomy, and immediately began improving. She spent hours there, reading agreements that spanned centuries, learning the legal architecture of the 5 territories, finding inconsistencies and redundancies that no one had noticed, because no one had ever read the full collection cover to cover. She also began to understand what she was. Kale arranged for a healer from the northern mountains, an old woman named Sable, whose white hair was braided with leather cords, and whose hands smelled like calendula oil and wood ash. Sable did not use the standard aura reading. She used a method Ilara had never seen, pressing her fingertips not to the chest, but to the temples, the wrists, the spaces behind the ears where the pulse ran closest to the skin. A true submissive, Sable said, after an hour of examination, her voice carrying the careful weight of someone who understood the significance of what she was saying. The purest I have seen in 40 years of practice. Your wolf is not designed to fight child. It is designed to bind. Every wolf who spends time near you becomes more stable, more bonded to their pack, more able to resist the fractures that tear packs apart. You are living infrastructure. That sounds very romantic, Ilara said dryly. Sable laughed, a sharp, bright sound like a stone skipping across ice. It is not romantic at all. It is exhausting. Your wolf has been working unconsciously for years, holding the Ironmere pack together, and you have been paying the cost in your body. The weight loss, the fatigue, the wolf that seemed too weak to shift. It was not weak. It was spent. Every ounce of energy was going into the pack bond, and there was nothing left for you. Ilara sat with that information in Sable's examination room, which smelled like calendula and beeswax, and the slightly metallic scent of the medical instruments laid out on a cloth. She sat with it, and felt the shape of her past 4 years rearrange itself around a new axis. The exhaustion, the hunger, the wolf that would only rise part way when she tried to shift, leaving her stranded in a half-form that ached in every joint. Not deficiency, depletion. She had been running on empty for years, and nobody had told her because the people who knew had decided she was more useful, empty. She found Kale in his study that evening. He was standing at the window looking out at the courtyard garden, where the rosemary was silvered with frost. A stack of intelligence reports sat on his desk, each one detailing another southeastern pack, declaring solidarity with Aldrich. The rebellion was growing. 6 packs now, enough to pose a real threat. Sable told you, he said, without turning. Yes. He turned then. The last of the sunset caught the amber in his eyes and set it burning. Are you angry? I do not know what I am. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The leather was warm, broken in-shaped by years of other bodies. I think I am angry, but it is buried under something else, under the fact that I do not know how to be angry at people who fed me and housed me and gave me a job and a place in the pack, even if they were using me. Even if the feeding was barely enough, and the housing was a room with a broken window latch, and the job was a basement with no heat. They still gave it to me when they could have thrown me out. Kyle crossed the room. He knelt in front of her chair. The Alpha King of the 5 territories on his knees on the stone floor of his study, looking up at her. That is not generosity, he said. That is maintenance. You maintain a tool. You feed a tool enough to keep it functioning. You do not love a tool. You do not see a tool. She looked at him, at the scar through his eyebrow and the jaw that could have been carved from granite, and the eyes that were at this distance not just amber, but flecked with gold, and the gold caught the firelight and threw it back. You keep saying you see me, she said, but you have known me for 5 days. His hand found her knee. Not possessive. Anchoring. I have known my wolf wanted you from the moment your hand touched my arm in that hall. I have known I wanted you since you sat across from me and ate 3 pieces of cheese before remembering to speak. I have known you were essential since you cited the Greymore Ashfall boundary accord from memory while standing in a gas station parking lot. 5 days is enough. I am not a patient man, Ilara, but for you I am trying. She covered his hand with hers. His fingers were rough, calloused from the grip of weapons she had not yet seen him carry. Warm. Aldrich is coming, she said. I know. He will bring the southeastern packs. He will say you stole me. He will demand I be returned, so his pack does not fracture without my power holding it together. I know. What will you do? Whatever you tell me to do. She stared at him. I am a records clerk. You are my mate, and you know the territorial law better than any wolf alive. So tell me, what does the law say? She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, the texts she had copied for 4 years in the basement of the Ironmere Records office, unspooled. Not dusty paperwork, not meaningless bureaucracy. A weapon. Article 12, she said. Section 3, the Sovereign Mate Clause. Any wolf whose mate bond is confirmed by independent healer assessment falls under the protection of the Sovereign's household, regardless of prior pack affiliation. The originating pack may not reclaim the individual. Any attempt to do so constitutes an act of aggression against the Crown. She opened her eyes. Kyle was smiling. Not the ghost, the real thing. A full, devastating smile that cracked open his face and made him look for one impossible moment young. There she is, he said. The War Council convened the next morning. Ilara attended. She sat at the table between Kyle's chief strategist, a scarred female named Maren, who communicated primarily through grunts and hand gestures, and the royal historian, an elderly wolf named Croft, who smelled like pipe tobacco and peppermint, and kept falling asleep during briefings. Ilara was the only person in the room who was not a warrior, a strategist, or a king. She was also the only person in the room who had read the relevant territorial agreements. Aldrich's legal position is based on the pack custodianship doctrine, she said, and 12 wolves stared at her. And she didn't care because her wolf was warm and steady and awake. He claims custodial authority over members of his pack. But the doctrine has an exception. Paragraph 7. A wolf who has been denied knowledge of their own classification by their custodial pack forfeits the pack's custodial rights. Ironmere knew I was a submissive. They concealed it from me. Their custodial authority ended 3 years ago. Silence. Maren grunted, approving. Croft woke up, looked at Ilara, and said, "Who hired this woman? She is excellent. The legal argument was transmitted to the southeastern packs by messenger. 3 of the 6 recanted their support for Aldrich within 48 hours. The pack custodianship doctrine was foundational to their own authority structures, and the precedent of violating it terrified them more than Aldrich's promises. 3 packs remained, Aldrich's own and 2 others led by wolves who owed Aldrich personal debts or harbored ambitions that aligned with a fractured crown. They would not listen to legal arguments. They were coming. Chaol prepared for battle. Elara watched from the study window as the courtyard filled with warriors in dark armor, their wolves barely contained beneath their skin, the air electric with the scent of aggression and adrenaline, and the metallic tang of weapons being sharpened. She watched Chaol move among them, and the way they responded to him was not the forced deference she had seen wolves give Aldrich. It was magnetism. They orbited him. On the night before the expected confrontation, Elara could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a fortress preparing for war. Boots on stone, low voices, the distant clang of the armory, and through the wall the steady, massive presence of Chaol's wolf, pressing against the barrier, pressing toward her. She got up. She walked to the door between their rooms. She opened it. He was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, shirtless, his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. The firelight painted his body in bronze and shadow, and she saw the scars. Not just the one through his eyebrow. Dozens. A map of violence written across his skin, his ribs, his shoulders, a long, ragged line down his left side that must have nearly killed him. He looked up. "I cannot sleep," she said. "Come here." She crossed the room. She sat beside him on the bed. His body radiated heat like a banked furnace, and her wolf leaned into it, pressed against his wolf through the thin barrier of their skin, and the sensation was relief, so profound it bordered on pain. "If something happens tomorrow," she started. "Nothing is going to happen to you." "I was going to say, if something happens to you." He turned his head. Those amber eyes, close enough to see the gold flecks, close enough to count them. "Nothing is going to happen to me either," he said. "You are going to fight." "Yes. You could be hurt. I have been hurt before." She reached out and touched the scar on his ribs, the one that must have nearly killed him. His skin jumped under her fingers, a flinch he could not control, and she felt his wolf surge forward, not aggressive, but desperate, desperate for her touch, the way a drowning man is desperate for air. "This one," she said. "What happened? Challenge fight." 6 years ago, the previous king's champion had a poisoned blade. He got one cut in before I broke his neck. The poison almost finished what the blade started. I spent 3 weeks in a healer's tent, and my wolf nearly went feral from the pain. And now you are going to fight again. I am always going to fight Elara. That is what I am. His hand covered hers where it rested on his scar. But I have never had something to come back to before. So I am going to be more careful than I have ever been. She leaned into him. Her head found the hollow between his neck and his shoulder, and his scent surrounded her, pine resin and forge smoke, and the thing that was not a scent, but a frequency. And she breathed him in and felt her wolf settle like a lake when the wind dies. They stayed like that. Not kissing, not claiming, just breathing together in a dark room on the edge of a war. In the morning, Elara made a decision. She found Sable in the medical wing, sorting herbs into glass jars with the efficiency of someone who has done the same task 10,000 times. "Can I use it consciously?" Elara said. "The submissive power. Can I direct it?" Sable's hands stilled. "You have been using it unconsciously for years. I want to use it on purpose. I want to know what happens when I push." Sable looked at her for a long time. Then she set down the jar of dried chamomile and said, "Sit." They spent 2 hours on the floor of the medical wing. Sable taught her to feel for the edges of her power, the way a swimmer learns to feel for the current. It was not a force. It was not a weapon. It was the opposite. It was a gravity, a pull, the ability to reach into the bond structure of a pack and either stabilize it, or if necessary, unravel it. "Unravel," Elara repeated. Sable's old eyes were steady. A submissive can hold bonds together, but if you push in the other direction, you can expose every fracture, every fault line, every place where a bond is held by fear rather than loyalty. You do not break the pack. You show the pack what it really is. And if what it really is, held together by force instead of trust, then the showing is enough. Elara felt the weight of that settle into her. Not power, responsibility. The difference between a weapon and a mirror. They came at noon. Aldrich's forces arrived at the mountain pass below the capital. 3 packs, strong 200 wolves in shifted form, their howls echoing off the granite walls and reverberating through the fortress. Elara stood on the rampart and watched them come a dark tide flowing through the pines, and she felt distantly the bonds that held them together. Aldrich's pack was a knot of fear and habit, and the 3-year-old threads of her own unconscious power fraying now, unraveling at the edges. The other 2 packs were simpler. Ambition and debt. Fragile alliances built on promises, not trust. Kyle stood beside her, already half shifted his eyes, pure amber. His hands lengthened into claws he had not bothered to retract. His wolf was enormous, even in half form, a dark pressure that made the air around him vibrate. "Stay here," he said. "No." He looked at her. The word surprised him. She could see it in the micro-movement of his eyebrows, the slight widening of his amber eyes. "I am not going to fight," she said. "But I am going to end this. Let me come with you to the pass." His wolf growled, not at her, at the situation, at the fundamental conflict between the urge to lock her in the safest room in the fortress and throw away the key and the recognition that she was not asking for permission. "If anyone touches you," he said, "I know. If anyone gets within 10 feet of you, I know." He exhaled, hard, through his nose, the sound of a man overriding every instinct he possessed. Then he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked down from the rampart together. The confrontation at the mountain pass would be told and retold in every pack for the next 100 years, and each retelling would get the details slightly wrong, so here is what actually happened. Kyle and Elara walked into the pass together, flanked by his warriors, but ahead of them, visible, exposed. Aldrich saw them and shifted to human form, because even he was not stupid enough to face the Alpha King as a wolf. He stood at the head of his forces, naked and sweating, in the cold mountain air, his heavy body steaming. "Return what is mine," Aldrich said. Kyle did not respond. He looked at Elara. She stepped forward. The pass was narrow stone walls, rising on either side, the ground packed hard by centuries of feet and paws. The wind came down from the peaks and cut through her clothing, and she did not care. Her wolf was awake, fully awake. Not the furnace of the first night. Something calmer. "A son." "Aldrich," she said, her voice carried in the acoustic tunnel of the pass. "You knew what I was." He said nothing. "You knew I was a submissive. You used my power to hold your pack together. You kept me ignorant and exhausted and small, because a tool does not need to know it is a tool." The wolves behind Aldrich shifted, not physically, something subtler. a change in attention. They were listening. Elara reached inward, found the power Sable had taught her to feel, the gravity, the pull, and she pushed, not against the wolves, into them, into the bond structure of Aldrich's pack, the web of connections that held 200 wolves in loyalty to a man who kept an anise flask in his breast pocket and used an Omega as a battery. She didn't break anything. She showed them what was already there, the fractures, the fear that passed for respect, the habit that passed for loyalty, the silence that passed for peace. She illuminated it all the way. Sunlight illuminates dust in a room you thought was clean, and the wolves of Ironmere saw their pack clearly for the first time. A female near the front whimpered. An older male sat down heavily on his haunches, his ears flat, his eyes wide. A young warrior turned to look at Aldrich with an expression of dawning understanding, the specific expression of someone who has just realized the ceiling above them is not solid. Aldrich felt it too. Elara saw it happen. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened. His hands, which had been fisted at his sides, opened and closed, grasping at an authority that was dissolving around him like sugar in rain. "Stop," he said. His voice cracked. "Stop it. You do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing. I am showing them the truth. That is all. If the truth is enough to break your pack, then your pack was already broken." The wolves of Ironmere began to sit, one by one, then in groups. They sat down on the hard ground of the mountain pass, and they stopped howling, and they looked at Aldrich with eyes that were not hostile, but also not loyal. They were the eyes of wolves who had just woken up from a very long sleep and were trying to remember where they were. The two allied packs watched this happen. Then they looked at each other. Then they turned around and left. Not a retreat, not a rout, a recalculation. Their alliance with Aldrich was built on the promise of his pack's stability, and that stability was evaporating in real time. They had no reason to fight. So they did not fight. They simply walked back into the pines. Aldrich was alone. Not alone. Vera was beside him. Elara had not noticed her before, half hidden behind her husband's bulk. She was dressed impeccably even here, even at a would-be battle, her hair pinned, and her coat buttoned, and her hands clasped in front of her. But her face was undone. The careful mask of the Ironmere Luna was cracked, and underneath it was a woman in her late 50s who had built her entire identity on a hierarchy that a records clerk had just dissolved with a thought. Vera looked at Elara, and Elara, to her own surprise, felt something other than anger. She felt tired. She felt the 4 years of exhaustion that she now understood had been caused by this woman's decision to use her. And she felt the anger beneath the exhaustion, but she also felt something else. A flicker of recognition, because Vera had built her power the only way available to her, through control and manipulation, and the careful maintenance of systems that kept certain wolves on top and certain wolves in basements. She had done terrible things, but she had done them from the same desperation that Elara had felt every day in the records office. The desperation of a wolf who believed that survival required being useful, and that being useful required someone else being used. It did not excuse anything, but Elara saw it, and seeing it kept her from hating Vera entirely, which was its own kind of mercy. Aldrich fell to his knees. The motion was not voluntary. Kyle had not moved, had not spoken, had not done anything except stand at Elara's side, with his half-shifted body radiating menace like a reactor radiating heat. But the combined weight of the Alpha King's dominance and the dissolution of Aldrich's pack bonds was too much for any wolf to bear standing. He knelt in the dirt of the mountain pass, and Elara saw the anise flask fall from his coat pocket and shatter on a rock, and the sharp licorice scent of it, mixed with the cold mountain air and the pine resin and the forge smoke, and it smelled like the end of something. Aldrich of Ironmere, the Alpha King, said. His voice filled the pass like water fills a vessel. You are stripped of your title as Alpha. You are stripped of your territory. You are stripped of your custodial rights over every wolf in your pack. These wolves are now under the protection of the crown, and they will choose their own Alpha through proper counsel. If you resist, I will kill you where you kneel. If you accept, you will be permitted to live in exile. Choose. Aldrich looked up. His eyes found Elara's, and in them she saw the thing she had seen in the great hall, the fear. But now it was different. Now it was the fear of a man who understood finally and completely that the wolf he had kept in a basement was the most powerful person in the pass. I accept, he said. It was over. Not neatly. Not cleanly. Wars never end cleanly, even wars that consist of a single confrontation in a mountain pass. There were weeks of negotiation, pack restructuring, new alliances to forge. The Ironmere wolves who had sat down in the pass needed a new Alpha, and the process of selection was messy and contentious, and required Elara to spend 4 days mediating disputes in a stone hall that smelled like wet wool and frustration. But it was over. On the evening of the 7th day, after the confrontation, Elara found Kyle in the courtyard garden. He was kneeling in the rosemary of all things, pulling weeds from between the cobblestones with his bare hands. The Alpha King, pulling weeds, his claws were retracted, his fingers were dirty. He looked in the golden late afternoon light like a man rather than a king. She sat down on the cobblestones beside him. The rosemary smelled sharp and green and alive. I want to choose, she said. He stopped pulling weeds. He did not look at her. I am choosing you, she said. Not because of the bond. Not because my wolf is pulling me toward you so hard I feel it in my teeth. Not because you are the Alpha King and I am a submissive, and the political implications are significant. I am choosing you because you sat across from me and watched me eat cheese and did not look away. Because you slept on the other side of a wall for weeks and never opened the door. Because you knelt on a stone floor and asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I was. I am choosing you, Kyle Voss, and I would like you to claim me now. He looked at her then. The amber eyes, the gold flecks, the scar through the eyebrow and the broken nose and the jaw that could have been carved from granite. He looked at her, and his expression was the one she had seen in the great hall, the expression of a man who had stopped expecting the thing he was waiting for, and then it arrived anyway. He took her face in his dirty hands, soil against her cheekbones, the rough calluses of his fingers against her jaw. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, and she could feel his wolf, the vast, dark, patient thing, pressing against hers with a force that was not dominance, was not possession, was something she had no word for, except recognition. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not brutal. It was thorough. The kind of kiss that catalogues, lips, tongue, the sharp inhale through the nose, the taste of him black tea, and something warmer the way his hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck and held her there, not trapping but steadying. When he pulled back, his eyes were pure wolf, amber gone to gold. He turned her head gently, exposing the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder. She felt his breath on her skin, hot, measured, controlled. She closed her eyes. His teeth broke the skin. The pain was brief and bright and clean, like the snap of a cold morning. And then it was gone, replaced by something that was not pain at all. The bond crystallized. She felt it lock into place, a structure, a bridge, a permanent architecture between her wolf and his, between her heartbeat, and his between everything she was and everything he was. She could feel his pulse in her own veins. She could feel his wolf settling around hers like a hand, closing around a flame, not to extinguish it, but to shield it from the wind. He held her for a long time afterward. They sat in the rosemary with dirt on their knees, and the evening light turning the stones to honey, and her blood was on his lips, and his heartbeat was in her chest, and neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that their wolves were not already saying. The formal ceremony happened 3 days later, not because they needed one. The claiming in the garden had been real and binding and permanent, but Kyle's people wanted a celebration, and Elara, who had spent 4 years in rooms where no one celebrated anything, let them have it. The great hall of the capital was larger than Ironmere's. Higher ceilings, older stones. The antler chandelier was replaced by iron candelabras that held 100 beeswax candles each, and the light they cast was warm and golden and made every wolf in the room look like they were wrapped in amber. Elara wore a dress that was not her mother's. It was white. Simple. It fit her properly at the shoulders, at the waist, at the places where her body was beginning to fill out, because she was eating 3 meals a day and sleeping through the night, and her wolf was no longer depleting itself, holding someone else's pack together. She stood beside Kale at the center of the hall. His hand was on the small of her back. His thumb moved in slow circles against her spine, and she could feel his wolf purring through the bond, a vibration she would feel for the rest of her life. The pack knelt, not because they were forced, because they chose to. 200 wolves acknowledging their Luna with bent knees and lowered heads, and the soft, unanimous exhale of a pack settling into place. Elara looked out at them. She felt their bonds, everyone, each unique, each a thread in the web that made them a pack, rather than a collection of individuals. She felt the strength of those bonds, and the fragility, the places where they held firm, and the places where they needed tending. She would tend them. That was what she was. Not a tool, not a battery, a gardener, a weaver, the wolf who held the threads. Croft, the royal historian, was in the front row. He was awake for once, his rheumy eyes bright, pipe tobacco and peppermint. He caught Elara's eye and winked. Maren was beside him, arms folded, her expression unchanged from her permanent default of mild disapproval. But she had brought flowers, a small bundle of wild rosemary wrapped in leather cord placed on the ceremonial table without comment. Sable was in the back, watching with the satisfied expression of a healer who had diagnosed something correctly and was enjoying being proven right. Ronan was not there. He was still in Ironmere helping the new pack council restructure. He had sent a letter. It was short, 4 lines. I am glad you found what the bread rolls could not give you. Be well, Elara. The bread in the capital is better anyway. She had laughed when she read it. Then she had folded it carefully and placed it in the cedar chest with her mother's lavender-scented dress, because kindness, even insufficient kindness, even kindness that was not the bond, deserved to be kept. The ceremony ended. The feast began. Elara ate roasted venison and sharp cheddar and dark bread with seeds and a spoonful of wildflower honey, the dark amber kind, straight from the jar. Kyle watched her eat with the same total attention he had given her that first night in Ironmere, and when she caught him looking, he did not look away. Later, long after the candles had burned to stumps and the last wolves had drifted to their quarters, Elara stood at the window of the room she now shared with Cale. Their room. The courtyard garden was silver in the moonlight. The rosemary was frosted at the tips. The cobblestones were dark with cold. Kyle came up behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin settled on the top of her head. His wolf pressed against hers through the bond, warm and vast and permanent. She leaned back into him. His heartbeat thumped against her shoulder blade. Steady. Sure. In the garden below, in the crack between two cobblestones where they had knelt 7 days ago, a sprig of rosemary was growing that had not been there before. New growth, green and tender, pushing up through the stone into the cold night air. Elara pressed her palm flat against the glass. The cold seeped through. Behind her, Kyle's warmth held. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Her wolf said it for her, a low, steady hum that resonated through the bond and settled into the stones of the fortress and the roots of the garden and the bones of every wolf sleeping within its walls. Home,